Hey there, my name is Rachel Kalaki.
I'm Annie.
And I'm Shelby. And welcome to the Magdala Podcast.
We know from experience that pornography, masturbation, and other sexual addictions are not just a guy problem.
The need for women to be accompanied in their journey toward healing from addiction has gone sorely unmet, and that's why we're here.
Magdala is a space where women can find hope, healing, and freedom from sexual addiction through support, community, and accountability.
Here on the podcast, you'll find everything from testimonies to practical advice to discussions on how to live fully as a Catholic woman.
You are not alone, and wherever you are on your journey, we welcome you to this table.
All right, we rolling. As in, I hit record. Welcome, Annie.
We did it.
Yeah, masturbation a couple weeks ago, OnlyFans today. It ain't no thing.
Keep it going.
It ain't no
what's
thing.
next?
I don't want to know what's next. To be honest with you, I don't want to know where we can go from here. Well, cool. So today we are back on the Magdala podcast. Wow, to talk about OnlyFans. So I think giving a little background on OnlyFans as a platform will be helpful. But I know I actually hadn't heard that much about it until founding Magdala. Like I didn't know anything about it really until then. And people were asking me what we were going to do about it. But yeah, so this is all kind of more recent data. But again, it kind of like we hit walls on the last episode of like how to phrase questions. I was about to be like, Annie, what's your experience with OnlyFans? That's not the way to phrase this question. When did you hear about it? That's better.
Yeah. Good question.
Thanks.
Yeah, I can't remember how I guess the idea came up. If I'm being honest, it was probably just through discussion of other conservative or media platforms that were responding to it. But it's got to be, probably around the time that Magdala was forming was the same time I sort of heard of the concept. So
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of surprised when I was like looking up data for this episode. It was created back in 2016, so it's been around that's almost 9 years now, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But the original intention of the platform was, they said, quote unquote, letting creators directly monetize their content and interactions, which is really broad and super vague. And I think that's why it's allowed itself to become the largest streaming platform for pornography basically ever. And like streaming as in like direct interaction with the creator.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes the founder will still say like, we never intended to become this. It's like, well, you definitely didn't stop it. So good for you, but I don't really know what to say to you for that. But I was surprised it's been around so long, and then also surprised that they just were quote unquote surprised that it turned out to be what it is.
Always surprised. I've looked up some things of the creator too, like just surprised that the original intent does seem so vague. How it was not thought about in advance. That sort of confused me. Or I guess with the original intent, what like I've heard of arguments of but like there's a professional baker on there. Like what's interesting to me, though I've never really frequented OnlyFans, is you can find content that is not pornography, which at this point is very interesting to me. Who is on there
And
or not
why?
pornography,
Yeah.
and why? What are they gaining through that platform? So always curious to know what the original intent is, but here we are, and the problem just gets worse and worse as we go.
Yep, problem is definitely getting worse. So data, and some of this was pulled from 2023. So not sure which of these, I'm sure some of these statistics have grown, but an estimated 1.4 million American women, so just in America, and then 3.78 million worldwide are OnlyFans creators. So a majority of the platform are women creators. There's I think it said something about like it's like a 70-30 breakdown of like women versus men. But at the end of 2023, there were over 305 million fan accounts engaging with the platform. So that's, yeah, again, like 1.4 million American women, 3.78 million women worldwide are the creators. And then there's a lot of men creating as well. But that, like the content base versus 305 million fan accounts in 2023. So that number is probably only skyrocketed because, again, that's a year and a half ago. Another way to put that, this is crazy. An article put it this way: 2% of American women are on OnlyFans. Like that's people hear 2%, they're like, that's not a lot. That is a lot. That's a lot when you're thinking about, like, we're talking about a pornography platform. That's a lot of women in our country. So obviously it's a super big and ubiquitous problem. Um, but yeah, those stats just blow my mind.
As you share that, I feel like we need to hold space for that. Do you know that reference? Do you know that meme that I'm sorry. We also should hold like
But holding
some
space is
different
good.
phrasing.
No.
Yeah. We should I think just take a moment because I think I mean, speaking to this audience,
Yeah,
one, we could easily be talking to women who are very directly affected by this. And if you are, thank you. Welcome. We're so glad
Mhm.
you're here. You have experience in this arena to even know more what we're sharing about. But for those who are like very very unaware, I think it's easy to keep this as one of those outside bubbles that we don't think of, you
Yeah,
know. And so I think it's becoming too much of a problem that we can't just forget about it on the sidelines, like it's not happening. Because what you just shared, if the percentage is 2% of American women are on here, like we know somebody, right?
of
This is
course.
where it starts to get personal. If it's not you, you know somebody, you have a family member, you have a friend. And again, just because of the nature of the platform, you might not even know. It might be so
Yes,
secretive that they could be doing this without anyone's knowledge. But it's becoming personal now. So just wanted to make sure we're all on that same page to hold space for a second
for
to be
how
like, wow,
personal.
this is personal. It's personal in a Christian lens of these are our brothers and sisters in Christ. And it's personal in that like you know somebody. We're in this together. And so we got to
Yeah,
start fighting this together.
yeah, and that's part of, I think, like its ubiquitousness is part of why it's so insidious, is that it makes it so personal and makes it so easily accessible for both creators and addicts, right? Like it makes it way too easy for both to engage in harmful behavior. Um, I was thinking about how, like in the sexual addiction kind of therapeutic world, quote unquote, buying sex is a it's supposed to be seen as like a very escalated form of sexual behavior or sexual acting out. So it's like when um yeah, basically like when you're engaging in your behaviors and your compulsions to the extent that you're willing to put money behind them and you're not thinking about necessarily the risk of that, um plus all the other risks involved in that. It just it points to all sexual compulsions are harmful, right? But it points to like an extensive level of harm, an extensive level of um, being embedded in your addictive behavior if you're willing to put money behind it. And this thinking about how OnlyFans has really blurred that line, because it's a monetized platform. It's made it much more anonymous and much easier for addicts to quote unquote buy sex. So for their behavior to escalate. And it's also made it much easier for, yeah, the women, the men who are creating to monetize things, monetize behaviors themselves that they wouldn't have necessarily sought monetization for before. Um, and that's kind of what you're pointing to, is like this is deeply personal because like a lot of women on OnlyFans, and I'm going to speak to women particularly, they're not necessarily women that would have sought out the industry prior or like would have been okay with the industry. I was actually talking, this is crazy. I was talking a year ago with a woman at like, I'm at like a Catholic young adult party. Okay. Like friend from the parish, like at their house. Okay. And this woman, also Catholic, also goes to my parish, starts talking to me once we like work came up and I said what I did for work, whatever. She starts talking to me about how she almost got on OnlyFans pretty recently just to do like feet pics, right? Quote unquote feet pics. And I was just like, great, this is weird now. Like I didn't really know what to do. But it's like that's how ubiquitous this is people, I think a lot of women and men, but women get on there as like, oh, I can just do this thing. It's fine, just monetize that, whatever. And these aren't women that necessarily want to be embedded in the porn industry, but it makes it so that that pipeline is really easy to go down. So it's really, um, yeah, it's really, really, really intensely um, traumatizing, but also just so harmful for both sides of that coin of like both users and creators. It's like really, really debasing of both parties there.
Yes, and something you're hitting on this level of how personal it's getting. Something that I was reflecting on is if you think of like the evolution of the porn industry over the years, how I don't know, several years ago, that most sex workers would
Yeah.
use names that weren't themselves,
Yeah.
and OnlyFans then creates this platform where that's just no longer the case. Like, and this is a generalization, right? But people
Right.
are coming forward as the name of who they are, not hiding. People who are supporting this, meaning like the fans
Mhm.
or the people who are buying, are also coming forward in who they are. There's a personal element to what you are buying and selling that was previously not there on
Right.
different platforms, which I'm sure is part of the appeal in many places because it does feel more personal. Or a
Right.
lot of these actresses will take quote requests from people,
Yep.
meaning then they're filming content directly for an individual using names,
Right.
creating exact things that are requested, this personal way that they are trying to cater this industry, though incredibly harmful, becomes very uh, desirable
Yeah.
because it's speaking to the human heart that wants to be seen, known, and loved
Yeah.
in a way that it's finally able to engage in content like this, where they always had this false notion of being seen, known, and loved, and yet now there's another veil, almost like a veil over the eyes, to try to convince yourself, like, oh, but I am being seen. This is a personal interaction,
Yeah.
specifically between individuals, just blurring the line even more to, yeah, what is real love and what does this mean to be seen in like
Oh,
sexual
yeah.
content?
Yeah, it's like the fine-tuned distortion. Like, just so like, there's
Yeah,
that, like, kernel of truth there, um, in the midst of, like, this whole big lie, but people hold on, like, for the sake of that tiny, tiny kernel and dismiss the rest of it. Um, I'm thinking of I, like, I thought I linked the article, but Matt Walsh wrote an article for Daily Wire, um, gosh, 2 months ago, maybe? Or no, back in January, and, um, yeah, this is not about our opinion of Daily Wire or Matt Walsh or whatever, like, keep that neutral, but this piece I really strongly disagreed with. I wrote a response because he talked about, like, how we get rid of OnlyFans from society is essentially bringing back shame, um, and the article was, like, saying, like, we should shame women off of OnlyFans, basically, like, kind of relegate them to the corners of society, shame this behavior because historically we always shamed prostitution. So that's the way, is just to shame these women. I was pretty shocked by like the lack of charity in the piece, and then when I responded, and this article is still getting comments. I'm interested because some people are like very aligned with maybe like my stance on it, but then or what I would say is like Magdala's stance is like nope, shame, like shame cannot defeat shame-based behavior, right? More shame is only going to make it worse. But then there were some really intriguing responses of like agreeing with maybe more of like Walsh's perspective of like um if they've chosen to live in shameful behavior, then we're just giving them what they've asked for. Or accusations of like being too soft towards this or too sympathetic to the industry, whatever. Um, but then another one that I think is interesting is like, well, why don't we, well, if we're going to shame women, why don't we also shame the men consuming them? And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, well, like that's again another part of the problem is you can't shame people out of shame-based behavior. And I think this is really important when we're talking about OnlyFans and for any of our listeners who are either watching content on OnlyFans or are creating on OnlyFans is just like at least Magdala's kind of belief is like just like any other unwanted sexual behavior, and sometimes even wanted ones, if we're being honest, but like any sexual compulsion, um, typically is born out of some place of shame, some place of trauma, of neglect, like some place, again, kind of like you pointed out, Annie, where you are seeking a truth and you have found a false answer that meets that need. Um, and I think as long as we're talking about these things, and like if we lose sight of that, then we lose sight of the actual solution. Basically, is like people are, however distorted it has become, however deplorable even or insidious it has become, people at their core do want to be seen, known, and loved. Both creators and consumers. And so shame can never, ever, ever, ever meet that need. It actually will only send that need further and further, further in and cover it with more of these like distorted behaviors. So that's a jumbled thought, but curious what you think, Annie.
I have many thoughts to your thought that we could bounce around for a while. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, even was when you're sharing for um, criticizers or commentators who believe that shame is the answer. To some extent, I would say, and again, I say this with gentleness because this could be
Mm-hmm.
received with defensiveness from creators or fans. But I would argue that the large majority on the platform, if not all of them, experience shame in some way already.
Yeah,
Now, they might
exactly.
not identify it as the word shame. I don't know if you followed, there are some new content creators, and I'm going to start throwing out names, but have started flights of sleeping with numerous men
Yeah,
on
yeah,
the
yeah.
same night. So there was a documentary done on one girl, and despite her sharing positive things about the experience,
She was
she's also
weeping.
crying
Yeah,
after and hates the experience. And
yeah. She
there's
was
so many
weeping.
things she
Mm-hmm.
regrets and would have done differently, and yet still comes back the next day and says that like she likes her job and she likes what she's doing. And for sure, like there's give and take. I'm not saying that everybody hates their life who's on this platform. That's a huge
No,
generalization.
right.
But what I am saying is that the majority of the people, if not everybody on this platform, is already experiencing that which Walsh and these other commentators want them to, which is some set of regret. Like if you would ask them, like if they could make, let's say, the same amount of money and insert all the positive things that they are receiving from this platform, if you could get X, Y, and Z, these things, while working this other
Mm-hmm.
job, like, would you? I would bargain that many would take you up on that offer, that this wasn't their first career choice. This
Yeah,
wasn't when they were 5 years old in elementary school. What do you want to be when you're older? That this is the thing that they were working towards. So I'm sure there's some element of regret, guilt, shame, whatever
yeah.
language you want to use, that people are already experiencing. And so, just as you argued, the way out of that is not giving them more of that, but in fact, they are already experiencing this in some way. So, I almost feel like one response has to be to tap into that place already, which is sort of what Walsh is getting at. But being able to tap into this place of like, I see that you are unhappy. Can I show you another way out?
Yeah.
Because making them more unhappy is not
Not it.
is not going to help them out, especially if they are receiving the benefits of quote, fame, influence, money, whatever the things are that they're
Attention. Yeah.
experiencing. I
Mhm.
mean, I was looking up even just some of the earnings of different people on the platform. I don't know if you remember Bella Thorne from her Disney
Oh my
Channel days.
gosh. Yeah, yeah, I
It
forgot she
says
was in
it
there.
says somewhere that the first 24 hours that she was on OnlyFans, she gained $1 million. Now,
That's
I
crazy.
understand she has a platform and stuff. Somewhere that I saw it said the average woman on OnlyFans is only making about $150 a month. But when someone's living from paycheck to paycheck, small things like that are very helpful. But
Right.
like when you're outweighing pros and cons, even for the woman who's only on there for the money, looking at big picture, like we do have
Mhm.
to understand that these women are experiencing, even if I don't use the word shame, some form of regret or hard feelings for what's going on, even if they have so many other like positive things going on. And so we
Mhm.
can't forget like the woman's experience in this is probably not the most positive thing of all time,
Right.
and there are hardships to it, and so we have to like tune into that without just pushing her farther down into this spiral of unhappiness.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
The Magdala podcast is sponsored by the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University. The Catholic Theology Show covers themes such as the value of a Catholic higher education, religious liberty, how to pray, the philosophies of St. Thomas Aquinas, and more. Stream episodes on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and learn more by visiting the link below.
One of the women I've talked to through Magdala who was thinking about getting off of OnlyFans, she was really young, but she made $20K a month. And one of my questions to her was like, yeah, how are you feeling about walking away from that income potentially? She's like, oh, I feel horrible. Like, I don't know what else I can do. And so you end up kind of getting trapped because of the income generation too. And obviously, like, she agrees to be trapped. Like, you know, it's not against her will, but there's just like, it's very nuanced. Even like the women who say they're incredibly confident being on there, feel very empowered. My question is like, what in your story, you know, makes you feel empowered behaving this way? Like that, what in your story makes you want to take power over sexuality in such a distorted way? Like, because there's a story there. I'm curious about that. So even if women feel very positively about their involvement, there's still a story as to why, and that story probably involves some trauma or something that I think should be understood when encountering them, right? So whether positive or negative, because I think your point is true that a lot of them, a lot of people involved in OnlyFans are already feeling a sense of shame. But I also think even the ones that maybe aren't feeling that, there's still a story as to why this gives them a sense of control and empowerment. Another thing is I think it's possible to like help people feel remorse and help people feel guilt without shaming them. So I think that's
Yeah,
like that's a line. That was one of the pieces of feedback I got a lot, is like that it's like excusing sin or whatever, but I think the Holy Spirit operates strongly through guilt and repentance. I don't think he operates through shame in the way that people want to say he does often. So I think there's a way to say like these things, both creating and consuming, right, on OnlyFans, like these are very harmful things to do. They're sinful things to do without this condemnation, this shaming of the person behind those behaviors. Because again, there's two sides to this coin. OnlyFans has been incredibly detrimental to the dignity of creators and the dignity of consumers. It's not like a one-way street. And it's only when dignifying both parties do we actually get anywhere, and providing understanding to both parties of like, why are you there and what's the story here. That's the only way we get anywhere as a society.
Yeah, absolutely. That we have to know the why, that we have to be able to dig deeper. And especially in a word that you use that I want to flesh out a little bit more,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it adds to this conversation, is empowering. Like is OnlyFans empowering? Is it a
Yeah.
false notion of that? Because that's what it becomes. That's what the sexual revolution has allowed women to, quote, feel empowered in their sexuality, because now they feel in control,
Right.
maybe is another language word that you could use in that place. Um, and yet, like, I know both of us would argue that that's not like real
Real power. Nope.
empowerment. So would love to flesh your brain out there if you want to go in that direction, but would love to hear why like it's not actually empowering to be
Yeah.
on a platform like this.
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I mean, it's because going back to the sexual revolution, it's like freedom for what? You know, like liberation or autonomy for its own sake really doesn't make any sense. Like Fulton Sheen kind of always did the, is it freedom from or freedom for? And that there needs to be both in real freedom, like freedom from unjust things or oppression or all this, but freedom for what? Freedom for virtue, ultimately. So the idea of empowerment that's directed towards vice isn't real freedom. It isn't real power. The idea of like being liberated for the sake of pursuing the good, that's real empowerment and real liberation. So I think it's more like the loss of intention behind the autonomy, because a lot of the argument behind creation on OnlyFans is like yeah, if this is what I want to do with my sexuality, then I should be able to, and nobody should be able to control that or regulate that. But again, it's like that's a lack of recognition of a purpose beyond you and beyond your personal satisfaction or how you feel about sexuality. It's there's a higher purpose, a higher freedom for it that you're not pursuing if you're engaging in harmful behaviors. So spitballing, that's the initial thought.
Yeah, yeah. And the autonomy piece that makes it feel empowering to say that I have autonomy
Yeah.
over something, that I have control over something. As you just said, nothing that we do is ever in isolation. I mean, we've talked about this in other episodes, especially when we're talking about sexual sin as an individual versus with other people.
Mm,
That every action that we do has some sort of consequence. Period. There's
right.
nothing that we ever do that can just be in isolation. That's not somehow affecting other people involved. And so, while there might be a piece of, but I'm doing this for myself. I mean, something like OnlyFans can feel this false sense of empowerment because for many creators, they aren't involving other individuals
No.
directly, right? They are engaging in sexual acts by themselves, and this can feel this sense of control, this autonomy.
Yep.
In the same way that, sort of speaking back to our masturbation episode, but somehow masturbation can somehow feel like this it's self-love, it's self-care, right?
Right.
This idea it's just for me, and yet we can never look at these actions just by themselves. They can never be isolated like that,
Right.
because if we look at the surface, if we look at the why, what are these actions? Again, they're inherently pointing to what they're not. They're inherently pointing to something selfish,
Right.
something inward, when the human heart is always made to point everything outward, that the love that I've
Mm,
received, that I'm meant to give, and somehow pointing my life back inward, narcissism.
yep.
I was listening to, gosh, uh, another person that doesn't need to be named, but somebody very famous person was saying a thank you speech for an award that they won. And the entire speech, I'll just say, was very narcissistic. Of this is how hard my life has been, how hard I have worked. Again, not like thanking the other people involved, and I think of that as very characteristic of our society right now.
Mm,
Sort of as a backlash to years ago where nobody would think about themselves. So then the self care movement came in and then almost overpowered to this all that matters is myself. I'm
yep.
gonna gain more power if I'm a victim, if all of my life revolves around me. And so just sharing that, like a false sense of empowerment is somehow I'll say falling into the philosophical idea that the world is centered on me.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
joke about that idea sometimes, all the time, my friends who listens, but that is just clearly not true. And if I start living my life in something that
Mm,
is central to me, everything points back to me. What real control or autonomy do I actually have uh,
yeah.
over anything? How am I really empowered if I'm just taking control of myself that I already had control over? Right. This
Yeah.
this centering on yourself doesn't actually gain you any power, which
Right.
is the false notion of this empowerment piece to begin with.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And you're still subjecting, like you're talking about acts aren't in isolation. You're subjecting other people to harm in order to feel that sense of control. Like whether you're like, oh, this is just for me, this is just me. It's like you are still doing harm in order to gain, to have people kind of underpin that feeling of your own empowerment. Obviously, the masturbation episode, we talked about that. That's different. But when talking about like content creation for OnlyFans, that's also what's happening. It's like um, other people, other people's sexual interactions, like that's not meant to underpin your feeling of empowerment or your feeling of confidence. That's a form of use, just like the consumer is using the person creating the content. So it's just a platform of use. But I'm interested in like distinguishing between control and self mastery because it seems to me like obviously we're called to self mastery, especially in the areas of the passions. So like sexuality being one of them. But also like I'm thinking about how the only context you're talking about, we can't act in isolation, especially in a sexual sphere. Like the only context in which we don't feel the need to have control or power over sexuality is a context in which we're in a safe communion, right? So like there's not, I wouldn't say like couples in a safe marriage where they're respected, and their sexuality is mutually respected. I wouldn't say either of them feel this need to be empowered, right, by sex, or feel controlled, like, or feel, controlled or controlling over sexuality. Like, when we're in a place of safe communion, the feeling of autonomy, the feeling of power, those things are antithetical to that. And I think that's important to acknowledge here too, is that again, like when women are saying, specifically women, we're talking about that on OnlyFans, but when they're saying they feel empowered, like my question is always like, okay, like, and when you're saying that, you're telling me you're not safe. Like something in your story is not safe, you're not safe. If you're feeling the need to have power over sexuality instead of mutual life-giving communion, you're telling me you're not safe.
Mm.
And so, okay, like let's talk about that. Where's the lack of safety here? Um, and I think that question can be non-judgmental, non-shaming, because I think most of us within Magdala know what it feels like to not feel safe
Yeah.
in this regard. Um, but I think that's the question, is when we're talking about like, yeah, I feel liberated, I feel empowerment. It's like liberated from what? Power over what? Like where have you felt this lack of safety in your life in this area? And I think
Yeah.
that's where my heart goes when we're talking about this. Is yeah, again, what's the story here?
Yes. And so many of these individual stories have been so impacted by the same thing you and I have, from this cultural
Yeah.
lens and idea that a woman's value comes from her sexuality.
Right.
That unspoken yet actually spoken in many ways through media and content and speakers, this idea that somehow our value and our dignity comes from our sexuality.
Yep.
That has been the ongoing story that has impacted our stories, the stories of women who are content creators in this, that this then becomes, again, this false notion of empowerment, or another word that you use is just this confidence, that somehow my confidence should come from my sexual appeal. If I am
Yeah.
more sexually desirable, then I should be more confident, because then thus I'm more desirable,
Yeah,
which was
and
the thing you were seeking in the first place. That's
where does
not
that
actually,
end?
you're
Yeah.
not actually more confident because more of you is out there, because more of you is exposed. But it's more so because you have this false notion that you are more desired, and that was the thing that you were seeking in the first place. And so I think this cultural sphere that's been created, that I know you speak on all the time too, and we do just in the nature of our ministry, like that can't be ignored, because
Right.
that is just the basis or foundation that so many of us
Mm.
women have been wounded in, to think that we have that so much of our dignity, if not all of our dignity, comes from our sexual value, thus skewing this idea of whether or not something like OnlyFans could be considered empowering.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm thinking specifically too just about seeing the common threads between ourselves, the women in our organization, and perhaps women who are on the content creation side. And for listeners who don't know, Magdala actually serves both camps. Like we have we have multiple participants, leaders even, who have a history of sex work in some form,
Mm.
creation, content creation, like stripping, anything kind of in those veins. Um, but the common thread is to me again like this a sense of shame surrounding yourself, but also just trauma. Um, and that the trauma of user, the trauma of creator, it just feeds the other. And so the common thread is seeking healing of those spaces in ourselves that we need to acknowledge and allow the Lord to fill. But um, yeah, I think obviously you and I, Annie, both want listeners to know, like, if you do have a history of content creation on OnlyFans or somewhere else, or a history of sex work, or you're currently in and kind of questioning it, wondering about it, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. At this point, either you or I are really shocked by anything anymore. So promise you can't scare us. That's what I've said when women have reached out before. They're like, I'm sorry to shock you. It's like, girl, yeah, no, we can't do that. It's totally fine.
Yeah, yeah. And while I mean, me and you both have very, very different stories as well,
Yeah.
that the heart of our stories are the same as any woman who
Yeah,
reaches out to us, which is a story of woundedness and redemptive healing. And
absolutely.
we're all on a journey. And something that I was thinking of in my own story, I've shared this a little bit. Sometimes I use the language that I was doing something like OnlyFans before OnlyFans was a thing, but
Mm,
like part of my history involves like having a social media account where I was sending like explicit things back and forth
mm-hmm.
with people, and it really played into the beautiful part of my feminine heart that wanted to be seen for me and only me. We've spoken about studies that have looked at like why women look at pornography and their arousal
Yeah.
templates, specifically looking at their imagination, their desire
Mm-hmm.
to see themselves in the scene, something that comes from being the actual person in the scene.
Yep.
Again, this false sense of empowerment, but even deeper comes back to this place of being seen for ourselves, because in some sense when I was sending these photos, I was no longer imagining myself as a different body. This is actually
Yep.
my
Mm-hmm.
body that people are responding to in different ways. And from that place, and in that place directly, is the place that the Lord looks and the Lord loves. The Lord does not love in action, again going back to shame and
Mm-hmm.
guilt. There is for sure guilt, and we should be able to speak about actions that are clearly immoral, not
Mm-hmm.
healthy things. And yet, to the individual's heart that is so desperate to be seen specifically as themselves, in their nakedness, in their exposure,
Yeah.
in the worst and the best part of themselves, in that part of the human heart, the Lord looks and the Lord loves and the Lord is gentle with, and He comes in as a gentleman with no force, with no pay, not trying to get anything out of you, but giving you and offering you everything in return,
Mm-hmm.
to come to this place of simple intimacy, just to see you as you are.
Yeah.
And so, just extending the offer that you just shared, but for any woman with this experience, we see you and know that you desire to be seen totally for who you are, with no masks. And
Mm-hmm.
while we can't do that perfectly, we will try. But the Lord does
He
do that
does.
most. He
Mm-hmm.
sees us completely in our most meanness, and that's the place that, like, every woman is seeking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think on that note, we can conclude. Catch us soon in the next couple of weeks with our next episode that will be on something that I can't remember right now. But thanks for joining us. And again, if you're seeking help either in recovery or in either an exit from sex work or just asking questions about your engagement in it, trying to process your own story, please reach out to us through the links in the show notes. All right. God bless y'all and catch y'all soon.
Thanks for listening. Check out more podcast episodes, blog posts, and how to get involved with Magdala by visiting our website, magdalaministries.org. Your love is meant to change the world. We hope to see you soon.